So just a couple of quick announcements, everyone. We do have an exam this week, so it'll be uploaded Thursday night. You'll have 2 days to take that exam. We will have a review on Thursday as well, so be looking forward to that for Wednesday and Thursday classes during lab session, okay? So we will have a lab after this at 9:45. We'll be going over hormones in the endocrine system, so just like the lecture today, okay? And then we'll have homework assigned as well as completing the lab assignments on the Lab Connect, okay? But we'll get started with chapter 25, okay? Hormones. All right, so hormones, interactions between cells that are coordinated through electrical and chemical signals. Hormones are going to be those interactions between cells that are chemical signals, right? And we talked a little bit about chemical signals last week in chapter 24 when we talked about the immune system, right? The innate immune system where chemokines or cytokines are exchanged between white blood cells and the diapedesis or the movement of those cells to outlying tissues, right? So leaving the bloodstream to the outside environment or to the tissues in the body. So hormones are very similar to that, right? They're secreted by organ systems, and it's a way the body talks to each other. It's a way that we have organization within the body, and that's how we're able to develop our body systems and control various processes and metabolic processes within the body. Okay, so hormones are very important. The endocrine system. So this is the body's main system for internal chemical regulation, consisting of all hormones. Hormone secreting cells, cooperates with the nervous system and regulating body functions and maintaining homeostasis, right? So the key word here is homeostasis. We want the body to have a nice normality, right? We want to control everything. We have a lot of cells. We want them to all cooperate together, right? We're not single-celled organisms like bacteria or protists. So we need to make sure that our cells are all talking to one another and making sure they're all performing their functions properly, right? So hormones help with this. The endocrine system helps maintain that, as well as the nervous system. So hormone. In multicellular organisms, this is a regulatory chemical that travels in body fluids from the gland or organ that produces it to other sites, okay? So where target cells respond to the regulatory signal. So again, there's going to be one specific organ system, one specific gland that's going to be producing these hormones, right? And it's just talking to other cells in the body, making sure that they're performing their normal metabolic functions and performing their proper tasks, okay? So a target cell is just any cell that is targeted by that regulatory signal, that regulatory hormone, okay? So hormone secretion from the endocrine cell. So this is diagram 25.1 in your book. And here you have the adrenal glands working. The adrenal glands sit up here on the kidneys, right? Just above the kidneys. And here you have the fight or flight responses that we'll be talking about a little bit later. But here's just a cell that's going to be secreting these hormones in the bloodstream. And again, this is targeting multiple systems in the body when you think of flight or fight, right? You have your increased heart rate, your increased breathing, your vasoconstriction, right? We talked about the constricting of blood vessels to increase your blood pressure, right? So this person is climbing a rock. They're probably a little scared, probably trying to figure out where they're going to go next. And again, the adrenal glands are kind of helping that body prepare for whatever task is this person's going to be completing, right? So and adrenal glands or the endocrine system works on multiple different levels, right? It can control the pancreas, it can control the stomach, and you know, hunger or sugar absorption or releasing in the bloodstream. So there's a lot of different factors, a lot of different areas that the endocrine system can innervate. Okay, and we'll be talking about a few in this lecture. Okay, and again, it's important to note that the endocrine system works very closely with the circulatory system, right? You require that connective tissue, or that blood to pass around the different hormones or water soluble, lipid soluble hormones that are going to be passed throughout the organ systems. Okay, so this is a way the body talks to itself. Think of it as a train system or as a road or a pathway that you can get different chemicals to different parts of the body, right? And if you want your stomach to talk to your brain and vice versa, right? You either have the neurons or these hormones that are being secreted. And these hormones, again, will use the blood as kind of a roadway to get to where they need to go, okay? So how do hormones work? Okay, so there's a few different types or two different types of hormones we'll be talking about. So there's water soluble, like erythropoietin, which you talked about a bit, and lipid soluble, such as estrogen, so your sex hormone. Okay. So water soluble, think of polar molecules, right? Think dipoles in water. Right? We have those electrical interactions, right? The positive and negative charge water molecule, right? Those hydrogens are going to be positive. Those oxygen side is going to be that negative, forming that dipole, right? Then we also have lipid soluble, right? We talked about the triglycerides and those poly saturated hydrocarbons, right? Those are going to have non-polar properties, right? Think of oil and water, they don't mix. Vitamin E, right? We talked about vitamin E and being toxic. It's very difficult to get that throughout the body, again, because we are aqueous. We do have water. We do have water soluble bodies, right? We don't have a lot of lipids that are going to be passed around readily throughout our body. So think of the water soluble hormones are going to be a little more quickly dispersed throughout the body, whereas a lipid soluble, they're going to be kind of a longer effect. So again, think sex hormones in the gonads. Okay. All right. So water soluble hormones require a receptor protein. Okay. So one of the main mechanisms is they need to bind to a receptor protein rather than being able to pass through the plasma membrane. So if you remember, the plasma membrane is it's a phospholipid. So again, you could have the passing through of some lipids, but again, if it's a water soluble hormone, it is charged. The lipid membrane does not allow charged molecules to pass through. Okay. So a water soluble hormone requires a receptor protein. So that's the most important thing here with referring to a water soluble hormone. Okay. So you have the receptor protein, you have that induction of a pathway. So you have relay molecules. We talked a little bit about relay molecules earlier in the cell when we talked about the cell, right? So think of that as kind of the marker, that trigger for that cell to perform a different pathway or perform a pathway, right? So you can have one or two mechanisms after this relay is completed. You can have cytoplasmic response. So it can be secretion of a protein or induction of dumping a vesicle or a different process, right? Or you have gene regulation. So you have gene regulation, protein control at the genetic level, right? So remember, DNA, RNA to protein, and you can kind of stop that either through a protein that's going to bind to the DNA or an inhibitor, right? Or you can have an activator as well. So you can have either the DNA or the genes upregulated, so upregulation of the mRNAs into proteins, or downregulation, where you have an inhibitor, which is going to prevent that, right? This all can be induced by the hormone, right? Through this receptor protein, okay? So one, receptor protein binding to that hormone, you have that pathway occurring, either the regulation within the cytoplasm, or you have it at the gene level through the binding either of activation or inhibition of a specific gene. Okay, so remember, this is water soluble. These are polar molecules, polar hormones. Okay, hormones that are lipid soluble can cross the phospholipid bilayer and bind to receptors inside the target cells. So steroid hormones such as testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, those are lipid soluble as well. And remember, those structures of those hormones, they're very similar to cholesterol, right? So we talked about cholesterol being embedded in the membrane, right? So this kind of gives you a hint to how they're able to pass through, right? They're non-charged molecules that are able to pass through this phospholipid bilayer, okay? And then they can bind to a receptor protein within the cell. And this is going to either inhibit or upregulate gene expression, right? So either you're going to produce a protein or increase protein production, or you're going to stop a certain protein from working, right? Another important thing to note with hormones is that they can have different regulatory properties in different parts of the body, right? So one area you may have a hormone upregulating a protein, and the other area of the body you're going to have a hormone that's stopping protein production, right? So there can be multiple different cells that are going to have different different outcomes when exposed to that specific hormone. Okay. All right, so the human endocrine system, we have an endocrine gland, a gland that synthesizes hormone molecules and secretes them directly into the bloodstream. Think thyroid and pituitary, which we're going to be talking about right now. There are also organs that secrete hormones that are not endocrine glands, such as the stomach and pancreas, right? Which we'll talk about a little bit of hormones associated with the pancreas and diabetes. These glands and organs produce hormones to maintain homeostasis within your body. And so again, we have to go back to that word homeostasis. You're maintaining the status quo of the body. You want to make sure that your cells are talking to one another and that they're all working together, okay? When you move outside of that range of homeostasis, you'll see disease in individuals or disease pathologies within animal systems, right? So again, the endocrine system is kind of going to be maintaining that body, maintaining homeostasis, making sure that that organism or that person is going to survive just fine with the cells talking to one another. Okay. So here we have multiple different endocrine glands in the human, right? So we have some organ systems such as a pancreas and stomach that are going to be a little bit different, right? They're going to have other organ functions. The stomach, right, is housing the food, and the pancreas is going to be dumping those digestive enzymes in the duodenum, or they're also going to have the endocrine sides of it as well. Okay, so the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland are strictly endocrine glands, right? So they're going to be up here in the brain, and we'll talk a little bit about the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. But the hypothalamus secretes multiple hormones, or makes multiple hormones, which the pituitary gland will secrete or make themselves as well. We also have the testes, which again are going to be male and female. So you'll have the progesterone and estrogen in females, and you also do have testosterone production in females as well. But in males, again, we associate the male gender with testosterone or androgens. Again, these are going to be those lipid soluble hormones. We have the adrenal glands. Again, those are going to be housed above the kidneys, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and the thyroid gland as well, which is going to be controlling metabolic processes. Again, we'll get into in a little bit. Okay. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Okay, and these glands are going to be housed within just beneath the brain right here. So you'll see it just behind the eyes. Okay. So the hypothalamus, the main control center of the endocrine system, located in the brain. The hypothalamus functions in maintaining homeostasis, especially in coordinating the endocrine and nervous systems. It synthesizes hormones secreted by the posterior pituitary gland and regulates the secretion of hormones by the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, so think of the hypothalamus as kind of that that cross between the brain or the central nervous system and your endocrine system. So this is where those two kind of meet, and the hypothalamus will be using the pituitary gland as a mechanism of releasing those hormones produced in the hypothalamus. Okay. So think of these as the brains of the endocrine system, right? The control centers. So the pituitary gland is an endocrine gland at the base of the hypothalamus, consists of a posterior lobe, which stores and releases two hormones produced by the hypothalamus, okay? An anterior lobe, which produces and secretes many hormones that regulate diverse body functions. Okay, so the anterior lobe is going to have multiple hormones produced there, whereas the posterior has just two, okay? So we'll talk a little bit about the antidiuretic hormone as well as oxytocin, okay? So, well, we really won't get into oxytocin, but mainly with the antidiuretic hormone, okay? So location of the hypothalamus and pituitary, again, it's going to be just beneath the brain. So here we have the cerebellum, and we have the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, okay? So hypothalamus and pituitary gland, they're going to be sitting just beneath each other, right? So the pituitary gland is attached to the hypothalamus. Okay, again, the posterior pituitary is going to be secreting those two hormones that are produced in the hypothalamus, right? They're storing those hormones produced by the hypothalamus, the antidiuretic, as well as oxytocin. The anterior pituitary gland is going to be making a lot of different hormones. They're going to be regulating a lot of different body functions, okay? So the hypothalamus, again, is going to be the information from nerves about the internal conditions and the external environment is received. Again, this is going to be that crosstalk or that link of the endocrine system with the central nervous system, okay? So this is where the hypothalamus receives that information, and then again, it'll talk through the pituitary gland to the body. The pituitary gland then is going to secrete various different hormones, whether it's going to be from the anterior posterior side that's going to be regulating bodily functions. Okay. So again, the hypothalamus sends signals to the posterior and anterior lobes of the pituitary gland. Hormones that are secreted, the pituitary gland secretes hormones and affects various bodily functions. Okay. So yeah, again, this is going to be kind of that second in command with the hypothalamus, where the hypothalamus is going to be relaying the information directly from the central nervous system to the entire body system through the pituitary gland. Okay. And again, the pituitary gland is going to have multiple different hormones. And this is where you see these hormones that are actually going to regulate multiple different bodily systems, right? You're going to have one hormone that's going to control different cells, and those different cells are going to do various different things that are going to be associated with that specific hormone. Okay. So remember, one hormone can have multiple target cells that have multiple different outcomes within those target cells. Okay. All right, so the hypothalamus regulates water homeostasis by synthesizing ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. I think it's also called vasopressin. Molecules of this hormone travel via long cellular extensions, so gray, shown here, to the posterior pituitary, okay? So shown here, where they are released into the blood. Eventually, the ADH reaches target cells in the kidneys, right? So the kidneys will then react or respond to the exposure to that hormone. So this increases water absorption and decreases urine output, okay? So it prevents dehydration, okay? So again, hypothalamus is receiving that information, and it controls the release of the antidiuretic hormone from the posterior pituitary gland, okay? Oxytocin, again, also associated with the pituitary gland, the anterior, and mainly associated with that feel-good hormone where you get from contact or feeling love, quote unquote. Okay, so this is where they have the bonding with mother and child. You want that hormone to kind of be secreted during those times, as well as the love and a feeling of euphoria when coming into contact with a person you care about, right? All right, so the anterior pituitary, again, is going to be multiple different hormones that are going to be secreted from there. So again, the pituitary, anterior pituitary is an endocrine gland adjacent to the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary that synthesizes and secretes several hormones, including some that control the activity of other endocrine glands, okay? So one of those being human growth hormone. This is a protein hormone secreted by the anterior pituitary that promotes development and growth and stimulates metabolism, okay? So the human growth hormone can, again, help the individual grow when exposed at early ages, but you can also have various different disorders as well associated with either too much or too little growth hormone, which we'll see in a minute in the next slide, okay? So again, the anterior pituitary gland is going to be producing all of these different hormones. So you have follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, growth hormone, prolactin, whereas the posterior pituitary gland, again, is going to be the oxytocin and vasopressin, okay, or the antidiuretic hormone. So remember that the posterior pituitary gland is directly going to be linked with the hypothalamus, and then it's going to be receiving those hormones from there. It's almost like a storage structure, okay? But again, controlling the antidiuretic hormone or the expulsion or of urine or holding the urine in order to save water, okay? Whereas the anterior has multiple different hormones that are secreted. They're controlling multiple different body systems, okay? So pituitary and growth hormone disorders. So a pituitary tumor producing too much human growth hormone causes giantism, so shown in right, and dwarfism shown in left. Okay, so this is going to be pituitary dwarfism or pituitary giantism. Okay, other issues besides tumors can be trauma as well. So sometimes you'll see pituitary function change or distorted after a car accident or severe trauma to the face, right? So sometimes you'll have severe trauma or laceration occurring to that individual, and you'll have the damaging of the pituitary gland. And again, it's usually a very, very strong blunt force or trauma, again, because it has to get through these bones here. So typically you see this in car accidents, right? So sometimes you'll see individuals that have damaged or harmed pituitary glands, and they can display some of these symptoms as well. Okay. So, but most often you see it as a tumor or an issue with the tumor. Okay. Tumors forming on the pituitary gland. All right. So the thyroid and metabolism. Again, the thyroid is going to be the gland, pituitary or endocrine gland located in your neck, kind of at the front. Sometimes you'll see swollen thyroids or goiter, which many people have seen images of, especially in third world countries where they lack iodine. But we'll be talking about that more in detail right now. But again, that is going to be located right at the front of your neck. Okay. So the thyroid. So thyroid gland is an endocrine gland located in the neck that secretes hormones that increase oxygen consumption and metabolic rate and help regulate development and maturation. Okay. So again, this has to work in close unison with bodily development, right? So usually younger children will have, they'll have higher metabolic rates, again, because they are growing. Okay. So the thyroid gland needs to work in unison with other organ systems and other endocrine systems or other hormones or other endocrine organs in order to help with the development of children. Okay. So thyroid hormone is a hormone secreted by the thyroid gland that affects many functions of the body, including metabolic rate, heart rate, blood pressure, and tolerance of cold. Okay. So again, thermal regulation is also important for this gland. Okay. So here we have the anterior pituitary directed by the hypothalamus. This is going to be secreting thyroid stimulating hormone or TSH. So the thyroid gland, again, is going to be stimulated. Then you have that thyroid hormone production. So the thyroid hormone is actually an antagonist of TSH, or the thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay. So more thyroid hormone, less thyroid stimulating hormone is going to be secreted. Okay. So it's a negative feedback loop shown here, right? So more thyroid hormone, less TSH. Okay. So when stimulated by TSH, the thyroid produces thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone is regulated through negative feedback as thyroid hormone inhibits the release of TSH. Okay. So hypothyroidism is low thyroid hormone increases, so low TSH production, and can cause the stimulation and swelling of thyroid, which is goiter. This can cause weight gain, tenderness, slowed heart rate, or tiredness, slowed heart rate, and intolerance to cold. Okay. So remember, the hypothyroidism, again, is lacking of this thyroid stimulating hormone and increased production of thyroid hormone. Okay. And again, it's going to have this lower metabolic rate, slower heart rate, intolerance to cold. So sometimes you see hypothyroidism and you see individuals that have uncontrolled weight gain, extremely tired, again, lower heart rate and intolerance to cold. So again, this is almost associated with lower metabolic functioning, lower metabolic rate. Okay. So lack of iodine in a diet can cause hypothyroidism. Again, you can see this manifest as goiter. So this is goiter shown here. So the enlargement of the thyroid. Okay. And again, the thyroid requires iodine to function properly. So lacking of iodine in a diet is pretty detrimental to the health of that individual. So typically we supplement iodine in Western cultures and our salt. So this is why we have iodized salt in the grocery store, right? We need to get our iodine through our salt. That way most of us consume quite a bit of salt. So we'll get sufficient amounts of iodine there. But it is one of those limiting or trace elements that we need in our body. Okay. So just like iron or folate that's supplemented in our grains. Okay. All right, so Hashimoto's disease. This is an autoimmune disease that is caused by the body's immune system actively attacking the thyroid gland. So typically you can see this as well with hypothyroidism. So in Western societies, we usually don't see goiter or iodine deficiency. So when we do see hypothyroidism, we think of Hashimoto's disease. Again, it's going to be that autoimmune disorder where you have the body's actively mounting an immune response to your thyroid gland. So your body's actively attacking itself. Okay. So think of MS or with the myelin sheathing and the body's attacking those cells that are surrounding the nerve tissue, right? So this is the exact same thing, right? The immune system is mediating a response to target your own organ system, your own thyroid, and it's essentially causing destruction or lowering that tissue, okay, or destroying that tissue. All right. So hypothyroidism is the overproduction of thyroid hormone, which is characterized by weight loss, high blood pressure, rapid heart rate, and increased sensitivity to heat. So treatment is radioactive iodine, which kills off cells in the thyroid. So the book kind of talks about this, but there is surgery options as well. You can have targeted iodine into that area, which has been noted as more common. But there's also other types of surgeries that can be used, as well as other types of medications. Okay, but the book kind of referenced this, so I'm going to go with this. So treatment of radioactive iodine, right? So again, the thyroid is going to be utilizing the iodine. And the iodine will concentrate. The iodine in the body will concentrate in the thyroid. And again, so you can use this mechanism to target that specific organ. Okay, so adding that radioactive iodine, that radioactivity will cause those cells to die, and then you can lower the amount of tissue that's present in the thyroid. Okay, thus lowering the amount of hormone that's being produced. Right. So you have yeah. So the symptoms are the opposite, right? So hyperthyroidism, think of hyperactive, overreactive thyroid. Again, you have weight loss, high blood pressure, rapid heart rate, and increased sensitivity to heat. So you're going to be sweating a lot, sweating profusely. So think of increased metabolic rate. Okay. Kind of a segue from there, potassium iodine pills are also used in the treatment against radioactive fallout. So one mechanism to treat hyperthyroidism is to use radioactive iodine, which kills the tissues or the thyroid tissues. Another mechanism that we use to help prevent radiation poisoning, especially for individuals that work close to nuclear sites or individuals that have been exposed to high amounts of radiation, such as it was in 2011. They did have that Japanese. It was at a meltdown in Japan. They would prescribe individuals that have been exposed to high amounts of radiation potassium iodine pills. Again, they were worried about radioactive iodine species coming into contact with those individuals. Potassium iodine, again, is much more stable, much more soluble. It should get to your thyroid much quicker and kind of outcompete any radioactive iodine that may have been absorbed into your body. Okay, and this can kind of protect you from being exposed to higher amounts of radioactive fallout. Okay, so potassium iodine pills would be really the only treatment. So pancreas and blood glucose. Okay, so here we're going to be talking mainly about diabetes, as you might have guessed, right? So the pancreas, again, modulation of insulin as well as glucagon. Okay, so the pancreas is a gland with dual functions. You have non-endocrine portion, secretes digestive enzymes into the duodenum. So remember, we talked about that pancreas innervating at the very top of that small intestine that's dumping in those different digestive enzymes along with your bile duct, right? But it also has a secondary function, right? So the endocrine portion secretes hormones such as insulin and glucagon to control blood sugar, okay? So insulin is a water-soluble hormone secreted by the pancreas that lowers the levels of glucose in the blood, okay? Whereas glucagon is a water-soluble hormone secreted by the pancreas that raises the level of glucose in the blood, okay? So you have two different hormones here. These are antagonistic, right? They're going to be doing or performing different tasks for the body, okay? One, insulin, again, bringing in the sugars. Glucagon is removing those sugars out to the blood so they can get systemically to different tissues, right? All right, so glucose and homeostasis. So again, these are antagonistic hormones. Those are going to be doing, performing two tasks that are completely opposite of each other, right? One's bringing the sugars in, one's letting the sugars out into the bloodstream, okay? All right, so here we have the pancreas. Pancreas releases insulin into the blood, so the body cells take up more glucose. Liver takes in more glucose and stores it as glycogen, right? You also have the glycogen in the blood or the muscle tissue as well. All right, so blood glucose levels falls to a set point. Stimulus for insulin release diminishes. Okay, so again, you have blood glucose is lowering, right? It gets to a certain point. And then you have the kick up of glucagon, okay? So here we have decline in blood glucose level, for example, after skipping a meal or you're fasting, right? Your pancreas will then release glucagon, okay? So now you don't have a meal, you don't have sugars actively out into your blood. Your body needs to get those sugars back out, okay? So glucagon will do this. So liver breaks down glycogen in response to the glucagon and releases those glucose molecules back into the blood, okay? Blood glucose level rises to a set point. So the stimulus for glucagon release diminishes. Okay, so now you're at an adequate level. Okay, and this is partially one of the reasons why they have you perform a fasting glucose test, right? They tell you not to eat for 8 to 10 hours before you come in and get your blood drawn, right? They want to see whether or not you have normal functioning or adequate functioning of your pancreas or cells in response to the glucose and insulin or glucagon and insulin. Okay, they want to see that your body can compensate without having food for a period of time, right? And we'll talk about diabetes right now in terms of the symptoms and what you would typically see. So diabetes mellitus, a human hormonal disease in which body cells cannot absorb enough glucose from the blood and become energy starved. Body fats and proteins are then consumed for their energy, okay? So think of diabetic ketoacidosis. So essentially, this is what we think of is the Atkins diet or the no carb diet, right? Again, this is pathological though. This is caused by the inability to pull in sugars or regulate sugars in the blood, right? Your body is forced to consume uh, other sources for energy, okay? So type 1 diabetes, again, diabetes is a result of when the pancreas does not produce insulin. So this is typically associated with diabetes at birth. So children that have diabetes, you just have the inability to produce insulin, right? And you're going to have to be artificially given or prescribed insulin, right? We talked a little about insulin production too, right? And in E. coli, again, that hormone can be harvested readily from E. coli, and it's going to be human insulin. So again, this person will have to watch their diet and take insulin for the rest of their life. Okay. And again, this is typically associated with an autoimmune disease. So sometimes it's idiopathic or they don't know where the disease came from, but typically we attribute the disease being caused by an autoimmune disorder, right? Where the beta cells in the pancreas are going to be targeted by the immune system. So think of back to MS or the thyroid diseases where your body targets those specific systems and destroys them, okay, inappropriately, right? An inappropriate immune response is what we think of, an autoimmune disorder. So type 2, you have diabetes results from body cells failing to respond to insulin. And this is typically what we see with older individuals that develop diabetes, right? So these are individuals that have high sugar diets, that have long been consuming high sugar diets, and then eventually you have the I guess it's considered the desensitization of those cells to the insulin. So they no longer respond to insulin, okay? And again, this is also very dangerous as well, right? You do have the inability to modulate or remove or add sugar into the bloodstream, okay? And typically what you see with these individuals as well is if they don't have consistent food or they don't have consistent glucose or consumption of glucose, you see them having low blood sugar, right? And you see the fainting occur. But you can also see high blood sugar as well if they're not properly taking their insulin or they just don't know they have diabetes yet. So, someone can mute their speaker. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So there's also gestational diabetes. Okay. So this is going to be associated with pregnant mothers. Okay. And this is caused by the child secreting its own hormones or stimulating the increase of sugar out into the blood in order for the fetus to be taken care of by the mom, right? Again, that child needs to be fed. So in order for it to be fed, that mother needs to have more sugar available for that child. So typically what you'll see is from that child will prompt the mother to have increased levels of sugar in order to respond to the fetus growing. Okay. So again, this is gestational diabetes. And you'll see this with pregnant women. Okay. All right, so measuring glucose. So people with diabetes use insulin pumps in the first image below, or you can also inject. Typically, these are a little fancier, but a lot of individuals still inject. So these pumps both measure glucose and inject insulin as needed. So these are quite expensive and quite fancy. Again, they're checking the blood as well as injecting insulin as they go. And this is just a much nicer way to perform instead of injecting and then guessing, right? Because sometimes if you can inject too much insulin, again, you can have that uptake of sugar, and then you can have issues with having low blood sugar as well. So again, you take the insulin, you typically would eat something, right, to increase that sugar and make sure that you're not going to go hypoglycemic, right, or below your normal sugar amounts. Okay. So glucose meters measure the amount of glucose in the blood and determine if an insulin injection is needed. Again, here you have an individual spiking their finger, or they're pricking their finger, pushing the blood out, and then checking the amount of sugar that's present in the blood. Okay, and it's measured in milligrams per deciliter. Okay, in normal, I think fasting glucose is around 90. After a big meal, it can jump up to 115 or 120, 130. You do not want to go above 140. That's typically the number that you start seeing hyperglycemia, or individuals that are unable to regulate the sugar. The insulin isn't working as well anymore. So that's what you'll see with individuals that are pre-diabetic, right? Above 140 milligrams per deciliters when they start worrying. I've seen numbers as high as 300, 350. So some individuals that don't take care of themselves, that are unaware of their status, may come in feeling a little not well, not right, or sometimes you'll see hypoglycemia where their numbers go down, right, and then they start fainting, and then individual will come in, to the ED, or they'll come in and they'll be fainting and not know why, and then boom, you find out they do have diabetes. Okay, so typically this is screened before, right? You take your yearly physical, or every 2 years you take a physical, and you examine how much blood, you do your blood work, right, for your lipid panel as well as your glucose, and you want to make sure that you're at a normal range. And again, typically they'll perform that fasting glucose, right? So you want that 8 to 10 hour fasting to ensure that that cycle is being repeated and is appropriate for your body, the normal functioning of that of the glucagon versus the insulin, right? Okay, so the adrenal glands and stress. So epinephrine, this is a water-soluble hormone, adrenaline, that is secreted by the adrenal medulla and prepares body organs for fight and flight responses. Also serves as a neurotransmitter, okay? Norepinephrine, this is also found in the EpiPens, okay, epinephrine. So fight or flight, again, this is going to be, I'll explain that in a minute, but norepinephrine, we'll just get through everything. A water-soluble hormone that is secreted by the adrenal medulla and prepares the body organs for fight and flight, and also serves as a neurotransmitter. Okay. Adrenal gland, one of a pair of endocrine glands located atop each kidney in mammals, composed of an outer cortex and central medulla. Adrenal cortex is the outer portion of an adrenal gland controlled by the ACTH. From the anterior pituitary gland secretes hormones called corticosteroids. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about corticosteroids and stress. So corticosteroid is one family of steroid hormones synthesized and secreted by the adrenal cortex in response to stress. Okay, so this again is going to be decreasing inflammation, right? But back to epinephrine. Sorry, so I was talking about the EpiPen. Again, this fight or flight response is going to be important for that flight or fight response. And again, it's going to be increasing the vasoconstriction. You're going to have the increased heart rate, and you're going to have the tampering down of the immune system. And this is why epinephrine is important, right? You can inject it intramuscularly into the leg, right? If you've been exposed to an allergen, right? And that allergen again is an allergic response, right? We talked about the IgG and mast cells secreting histamines, right? And they cause the closing or the constriction of the upper respiratory tract. Epinephrine can reverse this. Again, this fight or flight response is going to be controlling um, uh, the immune system or tampering down the immune system in order to prepare for this response, right? The immune system can wait, whereas your fight or flight response needs to be right away, okay? So this epinephrine can stop the immune response and allow that body to focus on running away or fighting, okay? So put the immune system on hold. Again, this is an artificial, right, freak out of the body essentially, right? Put the immune system on hold to allow that body to continue to fight or flight without the immune system ruining that, okay? Again, corticosteroids, we think of cortisol response, we think of high stress, right? After a run, it's gonna help you feel a little better, right? You think of the inflammation associated with working out as well, the tearing of the muscle tissue. Again, corticosteroids can also be used in joints or repair, right, to lower the inflammation of a chronic wound or chronic damaged joint. Yeah, so the cortisol shots, they're typically given to athletes with damaged joints or injured joints. And it's not a quick repair, but again, it'll lower that inflammation and allow that individual to play or work if they need to, right? So corticosteroids. All right, so gonads and sex hormones. So these are going to be the testes and the ovaries, right? And these organs are going to be secreting either the androgens or progesterone or estrogen, right? And you're going to be controlling the secondary sexual characteristics of humans. And they also have a role in reproduction, right? Talked about meiosis and sperm and eggs, okay? But here we're referring to the hormonal or the endocrine side of things, okay? So gonads and sex hormones. So gonads, an animal sex organ that produces gametes, and ovary or a testis. Estrogen, one of several chemically similar lipid-soluble sex hormones secreted by gonads. Estrogen maintains the female reproductive system and promotes the development of the female body features, okay? Progesterone is a steroid hormone that contributes to the menstrual cycle and prepares the uterus for pregnancy, right? And these two hormones can also be used artificially in birth controls, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But androgen is a lipid-soluble sex hormone secreted by the gonads that promotes the development and maintenance of the male reproductive system, male body features. And now new research is showing they might even release male contraceptives as well that are going to be androgen based, okay? So kind of stopping the production or birth control for males essentially, okay? All right, so mimicking sex hormones. So approximately 70% of all breast cancers rely on estrogen to grow and divide. Tamoxifen is a drug that inhibits estrogen receptors, right? So I'll just go forward to the next one. So tamoxifen again is going to be a competitive, it looks like it's a competitive inhibitor to estrogen on this androgen receptor complex, right? So if androgen's present, estrogen is present in the body, those cancer cells can grow, right? This will stimulate this estrogen receptor complex. Again, that breast tissue, that breast cancer cell is going to be sensitive to estrogen. It's going to allow estrogen present is going to allow for that cancer cell to grow and continue to fester in the body, right? Tamoxifen is going to bind and break down this estrogen receptor. So estrogen cannot bind, it cannot continuously divide, right? So hormone treatments are very important for certain types of cancers, okay? And this is why triple negative breast cancer can be quite scary for individuals, and it's often fatal. There's not a lot of treatments besides chemotherapies that are available for those individuals, okay? So HER2 negative, as well as the estrogen receptor complex is negative in those cancer cells. You really don't have a means of hormonally treating. And HER2 is going to be a receptor found in that breast tissue as well that can be controlled. But don't worry about HER2. We're talking about estrogen. But you'll hear those commercials: HER2 negative or triple negative, HER2 positive, estrogen or hormone positive breast cancer. You hear that on certain commercials. Again, you don't hear any commercials about triple negative, again, because it's very difficult to treat. Typically, you'll see chemotherapies or essentially toxins or poisons being used to stop that cancer from growing. Okay, but again, estrogens can be important for slowing or stopping that cancer growth. Okay, so other drugs can be used for different purposes as well. So testosterone replacement therapy or TRT and on androgenic hormones as well. So sometimes you'll see, especially in burn wards, they'll prescribe. I'm not too sure. I, I don't know if there's a generic version of it. It's something that in my LVNs might see often, but decaduroblin is a non-androgenic hormone that can be used for stimulating of growth, right, in tissues. So typically we think of anabolic steroids, but we think of anabolic steroids in terms of individuals that are trying to bodybuild, right? They're trying to anabolically build their muscle tissue in order to compete in like bodybuilding shows. But many of those hormones, many of those drugs were developed for medicine or medical purposes, right? And hormones have a very positive effect on individuals that are in severe trauma incidences or severe burn incidences as well, right? Those hormones are going to help promote those androgenic or those anabolic hormones are going to help promote growth and stimulate growth in those patients and those individuals, especially after a severe car accident, right? Severe trauma, decaduroblin is great, and it's non-androgenic side effects. So you do have those types of hormone therapies that are also useful as well, that are going to promote the growth. Okay, so growth hormone also will be prescribed in certain situations like that. Okay, so it's not all used like erythropoietin and Lance Armstrong, right? A lot of people think of hormones and those drugs in the endocrine system mainly associated with cheating or with a performance enhancement. Not always the case, right? We do have hormones or drugs that are used in the clinical setting that provide individuals with therapeutic properties as well. Okay. And then I also read a recent paper on TRT that it's actually for males that start losing the testosterone production. It's helping with lower the incidences of heart rate, lowering heart disease, lowering blood sugar as well. Again, they don't know if it's helping systemically this problem, or maybe it's just giving them a little extra vitality to get up and work out or eat better, right? But the paper kind of talked about testosterone replacement therapy is something that can be used in the future for potentially helping with those latent stage diseases, right, such as heart disease and diabetes, gout, things like that. Okay. All right. Any questions? Nope. Okay. Well, we will have a lab at 9:45. I'll send that link out shortly. And then we'll be going over the couple of labs that we have set up on McGraw-Hill. We'll also be going over presentation timelines and a little bit about the paper. Okay. So we'll be doing that in lab. All right. So any questions before I go? Okay. Thank you, Lucia. All right, I will end it here. Did you need anything else from me, Dr. Moore or Professor Dillard? Or did you, I was gonna add you guys to Canvas as well. I didn't know if you needed access like today or later on.
I'm trying to, am I unmuted now? I was trying
Yeah,
to.
you're
Okay, sorry about that.
no
Yeah, I would like to see just your, an access for a day, whatever day works for you. If you just want to send me an email.
Okay, did you want me to walk you through it? Because I know I'm walking Fernando through my micro section. I didn't know if you wanted me to walk you through
It doesn't matter,
mine.
whatever you'd prefer.
Okay, well, yeah, I can send you an email with times at work, and then I'll just add your email so you have access now and you can look at it whenever. I'm not too worried about it. Did you want both
No,
sections?
just access to one section of, this is Bio 20, right?
Yeah, this is Bio 20.
Yeah, just so we can, what I'm looking for is just whatever supplemental materials you have for today's lecture.
Okay.
Or any activities that the students are doing that correspond to,
Okay.
your hormones. Okay.
Gotcha. So I'll just send you. So I'll send a video. Do you want me? I can have like a Zoom recording showing you what I assigned in McGraw-Hill Lab Connect. Be like a
Yeah,
send it to
and
both.
whatever. I don't want to give you a
Yeah.
bunch of extra work, but whatever you think is best.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And there's no rush. I mean, it's, whenever you can get to it.
Sure. Sounds good. All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Have a good day.